Welcome to Bloom. Today, my guest is Zoey Charif. She was born in Afghanistan and had to flee the country with her parents, then went to Geneva, as I learned, then to Montreal, and then to Vancouver. And now she lives on the west coast of the US. So that's quite a trip. And we will talk about displacements and we will talk about what that means to a highly sensitive person to have to change places so many times in your life. And you're a criminologist and a data analyst. And you've just written a wonderful book that's called Love Can, in fact, be calculated. And when you first contacted me, I was a bit reluctant because my first reaction was, well, love and relationships cannot be quantified and calculated. But then we had a long, really, really interesting talk. And you convinced me that you had a lot to say in a very beautiful way. So now over to you. Can you give us a little bit more context about your own story?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. Yeah, so I was born in Afghanistan, and after fleeing first to Geneva and then Montreal, at the time I didn't realize that we did have somewhat of a unique journey because I don't know that our path was always safe. And even if we were safe in Geneva and Montreal, I can tell you that our nervous system did not reflect that necessarily. So when we moved to to Montreal, after a few years, mom decided that it was too cold for us. So we moved to Vancouver, and essentially I stayed in Vancouver until I was about 23. I did my studies there. So I studied criminology, and yet again, I realized that I put myself in a situation where my nervous system was on edge. I think that already I was a sensitive person. So my mom, as I was a child, she would call me a déresseuse. Déresseuse in my language means an empath, right? But beyond that, there were very clear signs that I was more sensitive. I was also a very small child. Like when I was, I think 7, people assumed I was like 4 or 5, right? And I always looked young for my age. So beyond that, I wasn't super muscular. I was a very, very skinny kid, right? So adding to that sensitivity, I think that I was very reactive to my environment.
Mhm.
And being so reactive to my environment, um, I guess started developing a need to understand my environment, a need to understand what's safe versus what's not safe. And that's likely why I fell into the topic of criminality and criminology in college, right? So initially, I was actually in international business, but I think after one class of criminology, I'm like, oh, this is totally for me. So I went into that. I went into that and I absolutely loved it. Here's the thing though, as much as I loved it, um, I think I kind of changed as a person. In fact, I couldn't walk from my car to my house without someone on the phone in the one hand and then pepper spray in another hand because I always thought someone was going to come up from the bush. And we're talking Vancouver, British Columbia in Canada, like very safe, right? But I had a very skewed perception of safety. And beyond that, my nervous system, like I said, was just on edge. So leading to, so with all of that said, when I was in college, I was dating someone that I was madly in love with. And another theme of lack of safety, I was cheated on. So all of a sudden, my heart fe started to feel unsafe. And I started to realize, whoa, like this hurts a lot. So then my mind immediately went into how do I understand love so that this doesn't happen again? And I came across this article, and the author said, you can't fall in love with someone unless they're a match. And that really rung true to me. There was something about it that I couldn't let go in my mind. So I'm like, okay, what is a match though? How do we define a match? So I start creating a little formula, which I now call the love formula. And this formula essentially um, was based on, okay, how do I determine that someone's a match? Well, the first things first, I need to determine what I want in a person, right? So I started listing out a list of values. And I'm like, okay, now how do I quantify whether they fit the list of values, right? So I started rating the person for each of the values. So let's assume at the time my values were education because I was in school at that time, maybe family, right? Purpose, whatever it may be. So I would start to score the person against each value. But of course, that's just one part of the equation because I'm trying to find a match. So I start to realize I have to score myself against each of these values. So I determined that if I score myself and then I score my partner, I have now two numbers that I can measure against each other, right? Eventually, I called it a self score and a partner score. So over time, I realized that what I was actually doing with the self score was I was measuring self-esteem. Think about it. You have a set of standards. It could be maybe five values, right? Let's assume I feel I'm not doing well in my education and I'm failing classes or I'm not going to class. Why would I give myself a top score, right? Now let's assume I have a partner who's going to every class, he's hitting his top straight A's or whatever. Clearly, I'm going to look up to that person. I'm going to admire them, right? Now, is that a match though? They're a match to my values, but am I meeting my own standards or thinking that they are meeting me and my standards, right? They're actually exceeding my standards, which is good, but eventually you'll learn that that also equates to unhealed behaviors, needy behaviors, jealous behaviors, and I'll go into that in a moment. So eventually, the theory expanded to not just values, but also evaluating trait preferences. Trait preferences are very important to add to this formula as an extension because you don't necessarily decide what you are attracted to, and without any self-awareness, you can very easily be attracted to traits that are not healthy, such as emotional unavailability, such as controlling tendencies, such as manipulation, right? And sadly, I do find that with highly sensitives, because the majority of us are have a knack for empathy, we tend to uh, naturally connect to people who are very self-focused because they see something within us where they can kind of tap into our empathetic heart. So with people who are self-focused and in the very extreme type narcissism, but that's very extreme, right? We tend to connect with people who need our energy, who need what we have to give. And in the beginning, we'll very happily go ahead and give them that. But of course, what happens there, we become drained, right? All to say, this love formula, the way you can measure and evaluate a partner is if you first determine your self-confidence and how you fit within your own values, which I call a self-score within the formula. And then you determine how your partner, A, fits within your own values and standards, but also how they fit within your trait preferences. Um,
Can we just, I know this is really complex and really interesting, but I think I would like to sort of backstep just a little bit before you sort of explain the whole framework. And it's a rather complex framework. So I would like people to be able to sort of catch up with you, right? Um, there are a couple of questions that come to my mind, and that is, you say that you want to demystify relationships by quantifying the compatibility, which is in a way what you just explained. How does that sit with the sensitive inside of you? When we had our first conversation, you also said that you feel yourself also to be a very spiritual person. how does that, I found that really intriguing in, in your vita as well, that you have these two sides inside yourself. Explain a little bit for us to better understand how you manage to combine these two worlds for yourself.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, because I often felt unsafe in my life, I had to understand my environment, right? So essentially, I connected two worlds. Me feeling unsafe is another way to say my nervous system was on edge. And my nervous system being on edge means I was sensitive, right? I was sensitive to my environment. Now combine that with intellectuality, into my goodness, intellectualism, right? And intelligence, right? And being analytical. I had to understand why I felt a certain way, and I had to understand why I felt unsafe, and beyond that, how to become safe. So, with my experience of being cheated on, that was one of the moments in my life that was quite defining because I felt it in my heart. It was just gut wrenching, right? So, because of that, I took it upon myself to understand love, to create the love formula framework, and to make mindful decisions and smart choices about who I was getting into a relationship with. But beyond that, understanding whether I had healthy patterns in terms of attracting a partner, whether I was looking for healthy traits, or whether I was magnetized to traits that were not necessarily healthy for me, and whether I was kind of enabling a self-sacrifice or self-focused dynamic, which eventually I found that I was doing that. But once I put pen to paper and I realized, okay, I need to start shifting my values to make sure that I'm attracting a rock into my life, but also my trait preferences. The traits that I initially had were not healthy. So shifting that and realizing this is destructive and I'm going to seriously harm myself if I keep going this way. I eventually learned to be attracted to more stable figures and more stable traits.
Yes, I think this is a really important point for many sensitives, that you would call it low self-score. I would call it low self-esteem.
Hmm.
That gets us into toxic and abusive dynamics. And I know you talk about that in your book, and I really like um, the name you give it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here, but you call it distortions. And
Correct.
we
Hmm.
could briefly go, because I think it's really important, to sort of see the process in here, that in a way you look at the relationship pattern, or at the way people connect, and then you look at certain personality types within that, within what you call the relationship structure, and then you look at what
Hmm.
distorts it. And in the next step, you look at what would make a decision healthy. And I think this is a really, really good handrail for many sensitive people to actually reflect on how they choose somebody, and on which base, or actually, how could we say, the base on which I choose somebody. Do I choose somebody out of fear, or because I think
Hmm.
they can give us security, but in the end they don't, and all these kinds
Hmm.
of things. So tell us a little bit more about the distortions, please.
Sure. So distortions essentially mean if there's something wrong with your calculation, you're likely going to fall into a misaligned relationship. So the very first one that I talk about is the self-sacrificer versus the self-focus. I touched on that briefly earlier, but essentially, as highly sensitive people, because our empathy is so high, we feel for other people and we want to be there for other people. And that's actually a very beautiful trait. The danger lies where someone who's naturally a self-focused person, so naturally selfish, whether it's because of how they grew up or because there might be a slight personality disorder at play, um, they will look at you and they will think, okay, I can take from this person. So it's basically the giver taker dynamic. If you end up with someone who is the self-focused, what's going to happen with your calculation is rather than working to build yourself up for your own values, you're going to try to build them up. So, for example, if family is one of your values, right? Rather than maybe checking in on your own family or making sure that you're there and supportive and a rock to your own family, you might try to be a rock to their family, right? So that's where, like, that's how you can apply that type of distortion. So beyond the distortions, if it's okay, I would love to talk about personality types. Is that okay?
Yeah,
Just
sure.
very briefly.
Hmm.
So I identified a personality type that is the emotional. The emotional will be more traits focused rather than values focused. What that means is they will look more for someone they're madly attracted to. And it's more of an emotional drive towards a relationship rather than a practical drive towards relationship. So for the people who are practical, they tend to look at values more than traits. For the emotionals, they tend to look at traits more than values, okay? Now, from our data, there's actually nothing wrong with looking for traits more than values because that's what attraction is. Here's where things start to break down. So between the practical and the emotional, we have two versions. We have the healthy and the extreme. So we can fall either under a healthy emotional, which is someone who's healthily looking at traits that they're attracted to and allowing that to drive their decisions towards relationships, or they can be an extreme emotional. The extreme emotional will completely bypass values, completely bypass what's practical and what's not practical. And they will only look at, oh my God, I am so in love. And oh my God, the sex is magnificent. And oh my God, this person is so sexy. And they make me laugh so much and whatever, right? Well, what's essentially happening is you're kind of looking for a dopamine hit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And
Okay.
beyond that, yeah. And beyond that, because you're a highly sensitive person, oh my God, that euphoria, that like sense of ecstasy. As highly emotional people and sensitives, we can feel ecstasy to a level that a lot of people don't, right? And that is addictive. But here's the thing, if you fall under the extreme emotional personality type, our data shows that you will likely not be able to sustain that relationship. The best type of relationship and the ones who are better able to sustain a relationship is a healthy emotional. What that means is you have to take values into account. If this person does like is eating away at your finances, eating away at your time to study, eating away at your time to read, at your time with family, at whatever, and they're not meeting you with lifestyle compatibility. And if anything, they're draining you from you achieving your own goals and showing up as someone who's self-respecting according to your own standards. What's going to happen is it's likely not going to work. It's likely not going to work. Either they're going to break up with you or they're not going to treat you well enough and you're going to get trained and then eventually you're going to decide you don't want to be with them anymore, right?
I think that
Um,
is a really deep learning curve for many sensitive people of, of that kind, of the deeply emotional kind. I remember in college I had a boyfriend while I was writing my bachelor's thesis, and I was actually on the honors roll. And
mhm,
he occupied so much of my time, just like what you described. I always needed to be there
mhm,
for him that I hardly managed to write my thesis until a friend of mine, a girlfriend of mine, actually made me sleep in her room and made me write. At that time, we only had typewriters, right? I sat in her room on the floor
mhm.
writing my thesis on that typewriter within 3 weeks. And,
Yeah, oh my
um,
goodness,
you
3
know,
weeks.
yeah, I mean, I mean, I had things, but just what you just described really, really fits that is that at that time I made somebody else my top priority. rather than saying, I need this bachelor's, I need that honors. And I didn't get it. I didn't also get it because there was a chemistry professor that had a fight with the biology professor, and I got caught in the middle of that. But
Mhm.
I think that is a really, really important point that you're making here, and that is, if somebody had explained to me what I'm beginning to understand now, between the difference between a trait and a value, I think I would not have made that mistake. I mean, to this day, I'm grateful to this girlfriend that actually nailed me down the room and threw him out every
Yeah.
time he came. But
Mhm.
um, so could you take us through again, clearly explain to us the difference between values and traits?
Sure. So a value is essentially a lifestyle choice, right? It's something that you respect not just in yourself, but in other people. So men and women tend to have different values, and it ranges across age groups as well. That's what we found in our data. But there were some common themes. The number one value that we found men and women had was honesty and dependability. So essentially, they wanted someone to be a rock, right? Which makes sense. The second one tended to be communication style and manners, right? Which to me makes sense because I'm married and now I get it. It's like, yeah, marriage is not easy. And if you don't have that down, it's extremely difficult to make it work. And then after that, it kind of varied amongst men and women, and it varied amongst age groups. Sometimes we found purpose to be a top five. Sometimes we found family, finances, career, education. Those tended to be the top as well. So those are all lifestyle habits, right? These are all choices that people make, right? You can choose to get an education. You can choose uh, to put family as a top value, right? Traits, on the other hand, and trait preferences, those are more inherent and those are a lot more difficult to shift. Okay. An extrovert cannot necessarily become an introvert unless something drastic happens in their life or they have some sort of brain rewiring, something happens, right? Or they get older, more mature, but it's a lot less of a slower progress, right? It's not a quick decision. Same thing with humor, right? Sometimes I can't help what I think is funny. Like I just, and it's like, it's just my humor. Like tell someone, hey, don't find that funny. Tell someone, don't laugh at that. You know what I mean? It's a very difficult thing to rewire. So traits tend to be, sorry, not traits, but trait preferences tend to be things that are just inherent within you. Okay. So for me personally, for example, humor is my number one. Like I need to be able to laugh, right? A second one is familiarity, like soul to soul familiarity, right? Like I just sometimes instantly I can feel like an energetic bond or something within our subconscious just matches, right? So to me, that's another one. But with that said, I will say that I used to have trait preferences that were not healthy. And I didn't realize they weren't healthy until back in 2021 when my partner at the time and we broke up and I was devastated. And I did the love formula and I realized that the trait preferences I had were not good for me. And I told myself, check this. So because I was able to put pen to paper, um, that allowed me to gain self-awareness. When I gained the self-awareness, I start to realize I am unsafe. And
Hmm.
because I have a strong desire to feel safe and to make smart choices, I actually somehow managed to rewire my brain to say, no, I'm actually totally not attracted to that anymore. That's not a good trait. And around the same time, I met Kevin, who's now my husband. And Kevin had top values, right? But not the traits at the time. And because I was doing my formula, I'm like, hold on, let me just wait a second because the values are there. I've already determined that my usual trait preferences are not good for me. He doesn't fit those trait preferences. Let me just wait and see if the attraction grows. And guess what? It
Mhm.
grew. It grew. We started laughing together. He became my rock, and now we're married, right? So all to say the difference between the two, values and traits, is that values are choices. Traits and trait preferences are not necessarily choices, but you can rewire your mind if you have a level of self-awareness, especially if the dynamics that you're falling into are unhealthy.
Yeah, so let's talk it. Yeah, I love that. So thanks for that explanation. Would you say, since we talked about safety, that aspect of safety also due to your life story and, the first, I don't know, 16 or 20 years of your life, would you say that sometimes trait preferences are actually built through trauma? Like for example, the example I gave with that boyfriend, I mean, these days I would never choose a partner like that anymore, but I did because of trauma that I had. Yeah. So you say that traits cannot be changed, but maybe we could go a little bit back, especially and include your studies in criminology, where you said that distortions or crimes are a symptom. So could we say that some trait preferences are due to or are symptoms of, I'll use that word, distortions or something that happened? And if you can unravel that, you can actually find your true trait preference. Could one say it that way, or how would you say it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's actually an example in the book of someone who develops unhealthy trait preferences because of how they grew up. Okay, the example that I use in the book is a young girl who grew up watching her mom and dad fight constantly and the father be unavailable to the mother, right? Unavailable emotionally because he was drinking and unavailable physically because he was always working. Okay. Now, sadly, what happens in a dynamic like that is you learn that that's love. You learn that that's like the basis of attachment, right? And then you grow up and you don't realize that it's not true and not right and that it's unhealthy. You don't actually get to that point that it's not okay until you yourself fall into those dynamics, right? Or maybe you see it on TV, maybe society tells you it's wrong. But unless you are actually replaying that same story yourself, um like that's the moment where it's like, okay, I've just taken on a lot of my parents that I don't want, right? So, yes, the self-awareness is very important. And that's why listing out your trait preferences. And one thing also I write in the book is you're not meant to list out what you think you want. You're meant to list out what you've been attracted to in the past. I would love, or back then, I would have loved, some trait preferences. I would want to want those trait preferences. But the reality is that I grew up in, a household where safety, um, how do I put this? Where my nervous system was on edge, right? Nervous system was on edge. So that started showing up in my relationships. Beyond that, like I grew up in an Afghan household. Yes, I grew up in the West, but it was Afghan. So I grew up thinking, actually, I wouldn't say I grew up thinking this, but eventually I, for whatever reason, decided that I would be more attracted to people from my culture because we have the same language, because the humor is similar, because there's like a kindred spirit type thing. Kevin is not of my culture. Kevin was born and raised in Southern California. He's a white man, right? Caucasian. And that's not someone that I've dated in my past. But when I met him, I'm like, he fits my values very well. Let me just wait. And I realized, okay, no, this is healthy. This is a lot healthier than what I've allowed myself to be exposed to. So, all to say,
Could you say
sorry, I
that
just lost my.
sometimes the trait preferences we have are, in a way, the way your way insinuated is are due to our culture, they're due to our imprint. And we could possibly say that they are like a mirror for us, because what I heard and what I really liked, also referencing it to my own life story, is that we need to be very honest in looking at the scores we get, or at at those trait preferences or at our values, because our values are also, culturally determined, and to actually use them, as I said, like a mirror for us to see what is healthy and what is unhealthy, what is aligned and what's not aligned with who I truly am, and not with the personality that was forged through certain events. Or, I think that's a very important point you make.
Yeah. I went to this meditation retreat, and they said something that really hit home for said, your nervous system is not who you are. You are essentially like there's been like a dump within you. Your parents have their parents' personality dumped within them. Your grandparents had your great grandparents' personality dumped within them. And you're essentially like a bucket of all of those people, all of those people and all of their traumas. And, essentially that's what you're carrying. And if you're not mindful and if you're not quote unquote in the now, you're likely going to reflect those things and those traits that are not you, and that may have worked for them at the time as like a self-defense, but for today it just doesn't make sense, right? Just like how what I was saying, when we moved to Montreal, our nervous system was as though we were still in Afghanistan.
Hmm.
But we're in Montreal, in one of the safest countries in the world. There was no reason to feel that way. Yeah, of course, we had moments of calm, but it was very obvious that we were still on edge. Same was true for Vancouver. And I know for me personally, I feel like I've carried that. I've truly carried that. Why is safety a theme for me when I've been safe truly my whole life? You know what I mean? So the meditations of being in the now is essentially, especially for highly sensitives, right? It's basically saying, let go of all that generational crap. It's not yours. It's not yours. It's what worked for them at the time, and then it was passed on generation to generation, and now you're just a bucket of a bunch of personalities that don't reflect who you are.
Yeah, so we could also say that in a way belongs to the distortions, might not exactly fit your category of it, but what it does, it twists our alignment, and it tends to bring us to the wrong partners, right? So what I really like about your book is that it helps to reflect. It gives a guideline, it gives a handrail to find out more about yourself, about your own self-worth, about who you are, and to build that, and then take that as a starting point to what do I want in a partner, rather than the other way around, because we tend to do it the other way around. What do I want in a partner, so that can give me my self-worth, that can feed the holes inside of myself. So that's why I find that your book is so brilliant about that, because it actually gives us a formula, and you call it the love formula. I wanted to ask you, who would you say is your book for? Who needs the love formula? Or whom did you write this for?
I would say that I wrote this for people who keep falling into patterns and don't necessarily know why they keep falling into those patterns, right? Um, our dating era is very different to what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Now we have a pool of people, of daters. And sadly, this pool can fit into the category of jaded. It can fit into the category of very selfish and self-focused, or it can fit into the category of people who genuinely want connection, genuinely want to settle down, right? The issue is, when you meet someone for the first time, you don't know which bucket they fall into. You don't know which category they are. And sadly, you don't find that out until much later when your heart is invested. For highly sensitives, like our heart is very precious. Our ability to give love is a gift. It's a true, true gift. If you're not able to identify who you're connecting with, my concern is that you're going to hurt yourself just the way I hurt myself over and over again. This book provides a framework on your own tendencies and which personality types you fall into, your own tendencies for distortions. And beyond that, actually listing out the values that are important to you. And if you find that in your calculation, you're more traits focused, i.e., you're more emotional than values focused, my strong recommendation is to check that. I was an extreme emotional. And I got hurt really bad back in 2021. And that was truly my rock bottom for self-worth, my rock bottom for how I felt I was showing up in the world, my rock bottom for whether I assumed I was lovable. And at the end of the day, once I start to realize, hey, I'm putting way too much emphasis on the emotions and not enough on the practical, that could have saved me from this relationship. He did not fit the values or my standards, but I didn't care. That's not okay. I shot myself in the foot in doing that. But with that said, with doing the formula, that's how I healed. I healed because I checked myself. I'm like, this is not okay. Right. And then that's how I fell into a more stable relationship and then eventually got married. So, all to say, this book is for the people out there who are looking for true, lasting love and who feel like they're falling into the same patterns and they're not understanding why. This provides a brand new framework. Imagine having a checkbox or a checklist on steroids. That's what that is. But it's also evaluating how you even do your checklist because we need to understand the root cause of what it is, why
Mhm.
it is that you're attracting certain partners, why it is that you're falling in love with destructive people, right?
Totally. Yeah, totally. Totally. So thank you very much for that, putting it all sort of in a nutshell. Um, and I'm sure this will bring a lot of value to those that are listening and
Yes, I
reflecting on their
sincerely
own.
hope so.
Yeah, I'm sure it will, reflecting on their own relationship style. So you know that the last question I always ask, what is it that I did not ask you or that we did not talk about that you would like to share with our audience?
I guess I would love to share this with your audience. Um, I think that there's a misconception about caring too much. And I think that we live in a world where caring too much is viewed as a flaw or viewed as something, oh, you must be insecure, or oh, you're looking for validation, whatever. Us sensitive people, we understand that's not the truth. And we understand that it's just because we just don't want to see people hurt. We just want to spread love into the world, right? It's such a beautiful trait that you have. But sadly, we live in a world where it's very easy to take advantage of that. So boundaries are actually very important, relationship boundaries. And this framework essentially is that it's making sure that you're not over giving, you're not over forgiving, and that you're attracting someone who meets you, right? Your heart is precious. Who you are as a highly sensitive person is precious. But let's make sure that you set up a framework for yourself so you can have a ripple effect of love. Because if you're constantly drained by someone else, you're not going to have that ripple effect. You're going to be drained. And, like that beautiful trait that you have that is so unique to this world, that is so needed in this world, you
Yeah.
won't be able to share that gift. So if your true self is an empath, if your true self just wants people to be happy, to be okay, to be loved, to feel safe, it has to start with you. You have to feel safe. You have to feel energized. You have to feel inspired. And if you're connecting with a partner who does that for you and who can meet you there, you're gonna be great. You're gonna be great and you're gonna feel exactly that purpose, right? So I'm hoping that this framework allows you to step into that role.
Amen to that, Zoe. Thank you so much. I really
Thank
love
you.
that. You should have said that
Thank
at
you
the
so much.
beginning almost. Oh, thanks
Let's edit
very
that
much.
out.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Zoe.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this.
No, so did I. Thank you.
Thanks.